Did you know that the person watching your every move could be the one you trust the most? Ethan Calloway stood in the shadows of his penthouse, the soft hum of the security monitors filling the silent room. His eyes were cold, calculating, but something inside him stirred with a flicker of unease. On the screen, Miles, his 7-year-old son, was playing with a small wooden toy, the sunlight from the window casting long stripes across the polished floor. Every motion was innocent, yet Ethan's pulse quickened. He noticed Lila Harrison at the doorway, her white shirt crisp, the red zip of her outfit catching the faint light, her expression unreadable. She was holding a stack of papers, a bundle of secrets he had not yet uncovered. Ethan's hand tightened over the edge of the console as he leaned forward, focusing on every movement. Miles reached for a book that had slipped under the sofa, his small fingers brushing against something Ethan had thought long gone. A flash of realization hit him. Lila stepped closer, careful, measured, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. Ethan's breath was shallow, each second stretching longer than the last. On the screen, a shadow moved behind the sofa, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to trigger instinct. Ethan straightened, muscles coiled, mind racing. He did not move yet, his presence unseen, his power restrained but palpable. Miles looked up, startled by a sudden noise, and Ethan's heart clenched. Lila crouched beside him, whispering reassurance, her hands steadying the child. Ethan's gaze shifted between them, and he noticed a small detail, something on the floor that should not have been there. A hint, a clue, a micro-twist that suggested this was no ordinary day. The child's innocent game had become a trigger for truths long hidden. Ethan's mind calculated possibilities, each one more tense than the last. The cameras recorded everything, capturing expressions, glances, the subtle interplay of fear and trust, each frame heavy with significance. Lila's voice broke the silence, soft but firm, directing Miles back to safety, her every action purposeful. Ethan remained in the shadows, analyzing, anticipating, yet a part of him surged forward, compelled by instinct he could not ignore. The sun shifted, throwing streaks of light across the monitors, highlighting details Ethan had missed, every object, every gesture a piece of the unfolding puzzle. Tension built with each movement, the ordinary had turned extraordinary. Ethan recognized the stakes, the invisible lines of danger and revelation converging, the child unaware yet central to the moment. Lila's eyes met his briefly through the lens of the camera, a silent acknowledgement of secrets, of truths yet to be revealed. Ethan took a breath, steadying himself, the weight of authority mixed with a flicker of vulnerability, knowing the next action would define everything. And just as he prepared to step out of the shadows, a sound, slight but deliberate, hinted that someone else was watching, and the story was far from complete. The moment lingered, thick with anticipation, as Ethan Calloway stepped quietly from the shadows, his eyes never leaving the monitors. Miles clutched the wooden toy tighter, unaware of the weight of the room around him. Lila's hand rested lightly on the child's shoulder, her breath shallow, her gaze darting to the corner where a faint movement had caught her attention. The sun shifted, casting long streaks of light across the polished floor, illuminating the small details Ethan had missed moments before, and the tension tightened like a wire in his chest. Every motion was magnified on the screens, every subtle glance, every nervous shift of weight. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, and Lila froze, her pulse quickening. Miles tilted his head, sensing her unease, and Ethan's sharp eyes caught the shadow flitting past the doorway again. His hand hovered near the console, ready, calculating. The air was heavy, charged with an invisible energy that seemed to pulse with every breath. Lila whispered to Miles, guiding him back toward the rug, her words steady but urgent, every syllable a lifeline. Ethan's jaw tightened as he tracked the subtle clues, the tiny details that revealed more than any camera could fully capture. The papers in Lila's hands shifted, and a small sound, barely audible, drew his attention, a hint, a fragment, a micro-twist that shifted the stakes without warning. Miles reached for a cushion, and the movement triggered a soft reflection on the window, revealing a flash of something Ethan had thought was lost, and his heart skipped a beat. Lila's eyes met his on the monitors, the silent communication threading tension through the room, binding them in an unspoken understanding. He could feel the weight of responsibility and curiosity intertwining the invisible lines connecting them all in a fragile web. The shadows moved again, deliberate and slow, as if testing the room, testing the boundaries, testing him. Ethan leaned forward, muscles coiled, aware of every sound, every shift in air pressure, every hesitation in the child's movements. Lila's grip tightened instinctively on Miles, her gaze flicking from shadow to shadow, calculating, protective. The cameras captured it all, the trembling hands, the faint rustle of paper, the hesitant steps, and each frame layered the tension, compounding the suspense, escalating the stakes. Ethan's breath evened, his mind sharpening, plotting next moves, the room alive with potential, every second stretched thin. A slight noise from the balcony drew all eyes upward, a subtle cliffhanger that hinted at yet another unseen presence. The moment paused, not static, but brimming with anticipation, every eye, every movement, every flicker of expression feeding into the uncertainty, the questions multiplying, and Ethan knew that what came next could unravel everything in a heartbeat. The tension in the penthouse thickened, each breath heavy, each shadow holding more meaning than it should. Ethan Calloway stepped closer to the console, his hand hovering above the controls, muscles taut, mind racing. Miles clutched a small stuffed bear, his wide eyes flicking nervously between the floor and the towering figure of Lila Harrison, who had shifted to shield him instinctively, her posture protective, her gaze sharp, scanning every corner of the room. Ethan's chest tightened, not with anger, but with the intensity of realization, the weight of consequences pressing down. He saw the faint glimmer of an object in Lila's hand, a slip of paper partially hidden, and something inside him recognized the significance immediately. Lila noticed his focus, her lips parted slightly, a catch in her breath betraying the calm she tried to project, and Ethan's heart quickened at the subtle tension between them. Every movement, every small gesture carried meaning now, stakes magnified by the invisible lines connecting their actions. Miles made a hesitant step toward the door, and Lila guided him back, whispering reassurance that sounded firm yet fragile, a lifeline in the silent storm surrounding them. Ethan's eyes darted across the monitors, replaying the smallest details, every shift, every pause, every expression amplified by the lens. The shadow in the corner moved again, deliberate, and Ethan instinctively leaned forward, analyzing, calculating, feeling the pulse of danger, the fragile balance that could tilt in. A heartbeat. Lila's voice broke through the quiet, steady but urgent, layering emotion onto the mounting tension, and Ethan's jaw clenched as he traced the subtle interplay of eye contact and posture, realizing that a choice had to be made immediately. Miles's small fingers trembled as he held the bear tighter, a reflection of innocence caught in the eye of uncertainty, and Ethan's mind raced, knowing that every action here would have consequences far beyond the penthouse walls. A faint rustle near the window drew all three of them toward attention, a micro-twist that hinted at unseen variables, a detail that could unravel everything in an instant. Ethan took a slow, controlled breath, his eyes narrowing as the full scope of the situation crystallized, the interwoven secrets, and the hidden truths pressing on him with silent weight. Lila adjusted her stance, protective and resolute, yet there was a flicker of doubt that Ethan caught, an unspoken acknowledgement of the risks, the fragility of trust, the delicate thread connecting them all. The sunlight shifted again, highlighting the glint of something metallic on the console, catching Ethan's eye, a clue that had been overlooked, a small reveal that hinted at even deeper complexities. Miles looked up at Lila, seeking guidance, and she met his gaze, steadying him, even as the tension around them built to a palpable crescendo. Ethan's pulse hammered, each second stretched, awareness acute, ready to act, to confront, to protect, to uncover. And then, as he leaned closer to the screen, a new detail flashed across the monitor, subtle but unmistakable, a fragment of a message, a whisper of a secret he had never anticipated, leaving him frozen in the realization that nothing was as it seemed, and the story was far from over. The air in the penthouse was electric, thick with the unspoken weight of secrets and choices. Ethan Calloway stood closer to the monitor, his fingers hovering, hesitation mingling with resolve. Miles clutched the stuffed bear, eyes wide, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the silent tension vibrating through the polished floors. Lila Harrison's posture stiffened, protective yet calculating, her mind racing to anticipate the next move, the smallest misstep carrying enormous consequences. Ethan's gaze flicked from the shadow near the window to the papers in Lila's hand, every detail scrutinized, every subtle motion dissected. The sunlight shifted, glinting off the floor and highlighting a note tucked beneath the papers, a clue that suggested a truth neither fully understood. Miles shifted, nervous energy radiating from him, and Lila's hand steadied his small frame, a grounding presence amid the rising uncertainty. Ethan's pulse raced as he realized the stakes were higher than ever, a decision demanded from him that could tip the delicate balance of power. The monitors reflected the smallest twitches, every glance, every pause, magnifying the tension as Ethan considered the paths forward. Lila's eyes met his briefly, a silent exchange of challenge and trust, her calm exterior barely containing the urgency inside. The shadow moved again, subtle yet deliberate, and Ethan's mind traced possibilities, each one heavier than the last. Miles's breathing quickened, and Lila's whisper reassured him, a fragile shield against the growing tension. Ethan stepped toward the console, careful, deliberate, calculating the weight of each second. A small sound from the balcony drew their attention, a micro cliffhanger that suggested an unseen presence and intensified the stakes. Lila adjusted her hold on Miles, steadying him, her eyes scanning every corner, analyzing every detail as if preparing for an imminent revelation. Ethan's breath evened, his focus sharpened, aware that the next moment could redefine their relationship, the dynamics of trust, and the power within the room. The papers in Lila's hand shifted again, revealing a glimpse of something critical, an unexpected piece of the puzzle that forced Ethan to make a choice between caution and action. The sunlight reflected off a polished surface, catching Ethan's attention, highlighting a subtle marker he had not noticed, and the realization hit him with a quiet force. Lila's grip tightened on Miles instinctively, their mutual understanding deepening, an emotional tether anchoring them as tension coiled tighter around every heartbeat. Ethan stepped closer, the weight of authority pressing against him, yet vulnerability flickered through his eyes, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the power. And just as he reached for the papers, a faint, deliberate sound echoed from the hallway, a decision point crystallizing, forcing Ethan to act, and the room held its breath as the story shifted toward its next turning point. The room seemed to hold its breath as Ethan Calloway stepped closer, the tension palpable with each measured step. Miles pressed closer to Lila, his small hand clutching hers, seeking comfort and the silent acknowledgement of safety. Lila's eyes met Ethan's across the room, a fleeting glance that spoke volumes, a moment of unspoken understanding and recognition. The papers in her hands shifted slightly, and Ethan noticed a line of text he had never seen before, a subtle revelation that changed the weight of the entire room. The sunlight moved across the polished floor, highlighting the curves of the console, the monitors, and the smallest details of their faces, every shadow and reflection amplifying the gravity of the moment. Ethan's jaw tightened as he processed the implications, the fragile balance between authority and trust, the realization that Lila held a key to something far greater than he had anticipated. Miles's breathing was uneven, and Lila's hand tightened on his shoulder, grounding him, providing a tether amidst the rising uncertainty. Ethan moved slightly closer, each step deliberate, assessing, calculating, aware that the next move could redefine their connection, their trust, and the unspoken hierarchy between them. The subtle movement of the shadow in the corner hinted at a presence beyond their awareness, and Ethan's gaze flicked from Lila to the monitors, analyzing, anticipating. Lila's posture shifted as she adjusted Miles, protective and resolute, her gaze unwavering, signaling through the smallest gestures that she understood more than she revealed. The papers revealed another fragment, a clue that made Ethan pause, forcing him to reconsider what he thought he knew, altering his perception of control and influence in the room. Miles looked up at Ethan, wide-eyed, and Ethan recognized the vulnerability, the silent plea for guidance, and something inside him softened, just enough to acknowledge dependence and trust. Lila's eyes held his for a long moment, steady, measuring, and Ethan felt a subtle shift in power, an emotional spike that challenged his authority and demanded connection. Every rustle, every glance, every slight movement was charged with significance, weaving a complex thread between caution, curiosity, and reliance. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of decision pressing down, the stakes suddenly larger than the room, larger than the monitors, larger than any anticipation. Lila whispered a reassurance to Miles, quiet but firm, and Ethan registered the tone, the cadence, the subtle control in her voice, a marker of strength he had underestimated. A light shift across the floor caught his attention, a hint of another layer, another possibility, and Ethan's mind raced, the unspoken choices, the shifting power, and the intertwined emotions colliding in a crescendo of tension. He stepped forward, reaching for the papers, for understanding, for the fragile bridge between authority and connection, and the moment paused, a pivot, a decision point, as he realized that the next choice would redefine the relationship, the stakes, and the direction of everything that followed. The tension snapped like a live wire through the penthouse as Ethan Calloway leaned over the console, his eyes scanning every monitor with heightened focus, every pixel revealing new layers of uncertainty. Miles clutched the stuffed bear, pressing closer to Lila Harrison, whose posture shifted, taut and alert, as though sensing an unseen pressure building around them. Ethan's mind raced, calculating consequences, weighing choices, the weight of authority and responsibility pressing against him. The papers in Lila's hands slid slightly, revealing more than a hint, a fragment of information that deepened the stakes, threatening to upend the fragile trust between them. A faint sound echoed from the balcony, subtle but deliberate, drawing their attention, forcing a pause, a collective breath held as the room seemed to contract around them. Lila adjusted Miles's grip on the toy, grounding him, yet her eyes flicked toward Ethan, searching, challenging, the emotional dynamic between them twisting, a mix of dependence, defiance, and silent questioning. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, caught between action and restraint, each second stretching, amplifying the intensity, the unspoken tension thickening like fog. Miles tilted his head, sensing the charged atmosphere, and Lila's whisper reached him, soft yet firm, layering reassurance over fear, a tether in the swirling uncertainty. The sunlight shifted again, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor, highlighting every motion, every subtle flicker of expression, turning ordinary movements into significant markers, each detail a pivot point in the escalating situation. Ethan's eyes narrowed, tracking a shadow that moved too deliberately to be incidental, a subtle but unmistakable micro-twist that hinted at an unknown observer, and his pulse spiked. Lila's breathing was controlled, yet there was a tremor in her voice, a rhythmic cue of rising stakes, compelling Ethan to confront the hidden variables. Miles shifted, a soft murmur escaping him, and Ethan caught the vulnerability, the immediate emotional trigger, a reflection of dependence and connection that drew him forward, anchoring him even as the danger became more abstract yet no less urgent. The papers revealed another clue, and Ethan's gaze sharpened, realizing that Lila's choices had layered complexity into the moment, altering the distribution of power, the subtle negotiation of trust and authority between them. The shadow in the corner shifted again, deliberate, the light catching an unexpected glint, signaling that they were not alone, that the consequences of the previous choices were converging, and Ethan's breath caught as realization collided with instinct. He stepped forward, every sense heightened, aware of the fragile balance, the emotional tether between Lila and Miles, the unspoken thread connecting his authority to their safety, and then, a soft click echoed from the balcony door, subtle but insistent, a trigger that promised revelation, danger, and the movement of the story into its next high-stakes crescendo. The penthouse felt smaller now, every shadow stretching longer, every sound magnified into potential threat. Ethan Calloway's eyes locked on the monitors, heart hammering, as Miles clutched Lila's hand tightly, sensing the gravity of the moment though too young to understand its full weight. Lila's stance was unyielding, a shield and anchor for the child, yet her eyes flicked to Ethan, a silent question burning between them. Could he be trusted, and could they survive the unknown unfolding around them? A subtle movement at the edge of the balcony caught his attention, a hint of someone watching, testing, waiting, and Ethan felt a surge of tension spike through his chest. Every choice, every subtle shift of weight now carried consequences, the delicate balance between authority and protection teetering on the edge. Lila whispered reassurance, soft yet commanding, her voice threading calm through Miles' rising panic, and Ethan recognized the fragile thread connecting them all. The papers in her hands revealed another fragment, a clue that drew Ethan closer, forcing him to decide whether to act immediately or risk letting the unseen danger dictate the terms. Miles shifted, eyes wide, gaze flicking between them, and Ethan felt the responsibility settle heavier, knowing a single misstep could fracture trust or put them in jeopardy. A faint sound echoed, deliberate and precise, a micro cliffhanger that twisted the air into taut anticipation. Lila adjusted her grip on Miles, and for the first time, their eyes met fully, the intensity of unspoken truths bridging the divide, creating an emotional spike that both tethered and tested Ethan's restraint. He moved toward the papers, each step weighted, every sense heightened, aware that the room was alive with unseen variables, each capable of reshaping the stakes. The shadow shifted again, deliberate, and Ethan's pulse surged as he realized the depth of the situation, the risks compounded by the intricate dance of perception and trust. Lila's whisper pierced the tension, a careful blend of command and protection, and Ethan felt the responsibility of choice, the awareness that his next move would define the trajectory of all three of them. The monitors flickered, capturing a subtle yet revealing motion, a micro-twist that suggested hidden connections and consequences, and Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, each heavier than the last. Miles' breath caught, a small sound that echoed in the charged atmosphere, reminding Ethan of the stakes, the vulnerability, the need for decisive action. The room held its collective breath as Ethan reached for the papers, a motion that would either bridge trust or escalate danger, and just as his fingers brushed the edge, a sharp, deliberate click echoed from the balcony door, a revelation and a threat combined, freezing the moment, and signaling that everything was about to change in ways none of them could anticipate. The room fell into a heavy silence, the echo of the balcony click lingering like a shadow over Ethan Calloway's thoughts. Miles huddled closer to Lila Harrison, sensing the gravity but too young to articulate the tension, while Lila's eyes remained sharp, scanning every corner, processing the aftermath of the sudden revelation. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the console, the weight of authority pressed upon him, yet he felt the subtle shift in his own perception, a recognition of vulnerability he had never allowed himself. The papers lay between them, fragments of secrets that now carried consequences far beyond their immediate understanding, and Ethan realized that one choice had already altered the course of their trust. Lila adjusted her grip on Miles, protective and resolute, yet her gaze flicked to Ethan, searching for acknowledgement, a silent measurement of loyalty and alignment. The sunlight shifted, highlighting the creases in the papers, each fold a reminder of what had been exposed, and Ethan felt the invisible lines of consequence stretching taut, connecting them in a fragile web of responsibility and reliance. Miles let out a small breath, a reflection of tension and relief, and Lila's whisper threaded calm through the charged atmosphere, grounding the child while amplifying the stakes for Ethan. He stepped closer, careful, deliberate, aware that any motion now could redefine the fragile balance between control and trust. The shadow in the corner moved subtly, a reminder that the external world, the unknown, and the consequences of prior choices were converging on them, testing every decision, every instinct. Lila's posture stiffened, protective but strategic, and Ethan recognized the quiet strength in her, a force that both challenged and complemented his authority. The monitors reflected the smallest shifts, the trembling of hands, the flicker of eyes, every detail amplified in significance, and Ethan's pulse quickened as he absorbed the implications. Miles glanced up at Ethan, a mixture of trust and dependence in his gaze, and Ethan felt the invisible weight of responsibility, the emotional tether that bound them tightly, yet threatened fragility at any moment. The papers revealed yet another hint, subtle but potent, suggesting layers of secrets yet uncovered, a micro-twist that hinted at further disruption. Ethan's breath caught, a deep, measured inhale, as he processed the new information, aware that his next actions would reverberate through their relationships, their trust, and the power dynamics shifting in real time. Lila's eyes met his across the room, the connection charged with unspoken understanding, the unsteady truce between caution and necessity palpable. Every sound, every subtle movement, every pause was magnified, and Ethan felt the invisible web tighten around them, the tension escalating just enough to keep hearts racing. And then, just as the room seemed to settle momentarily, a soft, deliberate click echoed from the balcony once more, a hint of something unresolved, a revelation poised on the edge, leaving the air thick with anticipation and uncertainty. The atmosphere shifted instantly, electric and charged, as Ethan Calloway's eyes widened, catching a detail he had missed before, a clue that turned his perception upside down. Miles clutched Lila Harrison's hand tighter, sensing the sudden change in energy, his small body pressing closer to her for reassurance. Lila's gaze darted toward the console, her lips parting slightly, the subtle movement of her shoulders betraying both apprehension and determination. The papers she held revealed a hidden notation, a secret embedded within the lines, and Ethan realized that the balance of power had shifted, that the narrative he had believed he controlled was unraveling before his eyes. The sunlight reflected off the polished floor, slicing across the room and highlighting the monitors revealing angles and interactions he had not accounted for, each flicker of motion twisting his assumptions. Miles looked up at Ethan. Wide-eyed, the unspoken trust between them now weighed against the revelation that Lila held more knowledge than he had ever anticipated. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the fragments, each one destabilizing his authority, each one amplifying the uncertainty of the moment. The faint sound from the balcony returned, deliberate, a pulse that echoed in the tense silence, and Ethan realized that someone else had been observing, manipulating the situation from an unseen vantage point. Lila's stance became more assertive, protective yet commanding, and Ethan felt the subtle surrender of control, a recognition that her actions, her insight, and her presence now dictated the rhythm of the unfolding drama. Miles squeezed her hand, a reminder of innocence caught in a shifting tide, and Ethan's gaze softened for the briefest moment, registering the dependency, the connection, and the newfound gravity in their dynamic. The shadow moved again, slight but telling, a micro-twist that altered the trajectory of decisions, forcing Ethan to reconsider every choice he had made in the preceding moments. The papers, the monitors, the subtle gestures, the small breathes between them, all pointed to a realization that the story was no longer solely his to command. Lila's eyes locked with his, unflinching, conveying an unspoken challenge and understanding simultaneously, a shift that redefined their relationship and the stakes of every action. Ethan stepped back slightly, recalibrating, absorbing the layers of information, feeling the invisible thread of influence tilt in her favor, the emotional intensity spiking with clarity. Every second stretched, charged with anticipation, as the room vibrated with unspoken tension, the fragile equilibrium teetering. And then, just as he reached toward the console to assert control, a sudden alert flashed across the main monitor, a signal he had never seen before, revealing a hidden connection between the shadows and the papers, and Ethan's breath caught, knowing that the next moment would redefine everything and force a confrontation that could change the course of their story entirely. The tension exploded in the penthouse, every shadow, every movement magnified as Ethan Calloway's eyes darted from the monitors to Lila Harrison and back, heart pounding, mind racing. Miles clutched her hand, small fingers tightening, sensing the magnitude of what was happening though unable to name it, and Lila's stance shifted, protective yet resolute, her gaze locked on Ethan as if silently daring him to make the choice that would define them all. The papers. In her hands trembled slightly, a fragment of information catching the light, revealing a hidden truth that changed everything Ethan thought he knew, and he felt the weight of authority strain against the unexpected shift in knowledge. A subtle movement at the balcony, deliberate and precise, drew his attention, a reminder that the stakes were no longer confined to the room, and that unseen eyes were measuring every decision, every hesitation. Ethan's breath came faster, shallow yet steady, as he processed the convergence of trust, responsibility, and risk, the unspoken consequences of prior choices pressing on him with undeniable force. Lila whispered softly to Miles, grounding him, projecting calm while tension rippled through the room like electricity, and Ethan recognized the duality. He needed to act, yet any action could unravel the fragile connection they had built in these moments of uncertainty. The sunlight shifted sharply, throwing reflections across the monitors and floor, highlighting details Ethan had overlooked before, each one a potential pivot in the escalating situation. Miles looked up at Ethan, eyes wide with dependence and implicit trust, and the realization struck him that his decision now would not just influence the immediate moment, but redefine the fragile balance of power and emotional tether between them. Lila's hand rested lightly on the papers, her posture unwavering yet subtly assertive, signaling that she understood the depth of the unfolding events, and Ethan felt the invisible shift. Control was no longer absolute, insight and instinct now shared authority. The monitors flickered, catching a movement so brief it might have been imagined, yet Ethan felt the surge of awareness, the realization that each detail now mattered more than ever. The shadow moved again, and Ethan's pulse raced, muscles coiled, every instinct primed for decisive action, yet the moment required deliberation, the weight of potential loss and revelation heavy on his shoulders. The air seemed to thicken, charged with anticipation, the room holding its collective breath, and every glance, every small motion carried significance, every heartbeat marking the tension that could not be undone. Ethan reached toward the papers, his fingers pausing just above them, the decision suspended, a precipice of consequence hanging before him, and in that instant, the entire story seemed to teeter, ready to pivot into a final confrontation that would change everything. The penthouse seemed to exhale as Ethan Calloway finally lowered his hand from the papers, the tension slowly giving way to a quiet, weighty clarity. Miles sat close to Lila Harrison, his small face softened, a tentative smile forming as he sensed safety returning, and Lila's protective gaze relaxed, though her eyes remained alert, scanning for any lingering uncertainty. Ethan stepped closer to them, the initial rigid authority replaced with a controlled calm, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the depth of connection, the intertwining of responsibility, trust, and care. The monitors displayed every subtle motion, yet the room felt lighter, as if the revelation and choices had shifted the invisible balance, transforming tension into understanding. Lila's hand rested gently on Miles, her voice soft, measured, conveying reassurance, and Ethan recognized in that moment that leadership was not only power but also the willingness to rely on others, to share stakes and vulnerabilities. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the polished floors and the papers that had once carried secrets, now a testament to the difficult truths unveiled and the clarity earned. Ethan met Lila's eyes, and in the unspoken exchange, there was acknowledgement of respect, reliance, and an altered equilibrium, a shift that neither could undo nor take lightly. Miles giggled quietly, breaking the last edge of fear, and Ethan allowed himself a faint, rare smile, realizing that protection was not about control but presence, about being there when it mattered most. The subtle shadows in the corners no longer carried threat, but a reminder of the trials endured and the lessons learned, the invisible threads of trust woven stronger through adversity. Lila adjusted her stance, half relieved, half vigilant, and Ethan's breath slowed, each inhale steady, each exhale deliberate, as he felt the room settle, the moment crystallizing into an emotional payoff that resonated deeper than authority ever could. He looked at Miles and Lila together, the responsibility and connection clear, the previous fears transformed into understanding, and the warmth of the bond became tangible, a delicate yet unbreakable thread. The papers lay on the console, a silent testament to choices made and consequences faced, while Ethan's eyes reflected a mix of contemplation and gratitude, a man reshaped by observation, by restraint, by trust earned in the quiet aftermath of crisis. And as the room held its gentle, cautious calm, a faint moral echo lingered in the air, a reminder that true strength is measured not only by power but by the courage to care and to act when it matters most. The penthouse finally settled into a quiet that felt both heavy and relieving, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after the storm of revelations and choices. Ethan Calloway stood slightly apart, his gaze softened yet sharpened by the clarity of understanding, the weight of authority tempered by the connection he had forged in these tense hours. Miles nestled closer to Lila Harrison, his small hands gripping hers, a mixture of trust, relief, and wonder in his wide eyes, and Lila's protective posture relaxed just enough to reveal a subtle smile of cautious triumph. Ethan approached, each step measured, aware that the dynamics between them had shifted irreversibly, the invisible threads of power and reliance now interwoven with mutual respect and understanding. The papers on the console lay untouched, their secrets acknowledged but no longer threatening, a testament to decisions faced and the cost of insight. The monitors flickered, catching brief reflections of sunlight, shadows moving across the polished floor, and Ethan felt the room pulse with the lingering tension of choices made, the echoes of what had been endured. Lila's hand rested lightly on Miles, her voice soft as she guided him toward calm, and Ethan observed the nuanced balance, recognizing that true authority had evolved into something more complex, more human, shaped by empathy, patience, and vigilance. Miles' laughter, tentative yet genuine, broke the last thread of residual fear, and Ethan allowed himself the rare release of a quiet smile, knowing that protection was not dominance, but presence, awareness, and the courage to act at the right moment. Shadows lingered in corners, not threatening but hinting at the fragility of equilibrium, the reminder that the story's full consequences were yet to unfold, and that growth, insight, and understanding had their price. Lila's eyes met Ethan's once more, an unspoken acknowledgement of the trust earned, the bond strengthened, and the path forward uncertain yet shared, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath, poised on the cusp of continuation, the air charged with anticipation for what was to come. A faint glint on the console caught Ethan's attention, subtle yet deliberate, a small clue left unresolved, promising that even in calm, the narrative's threads extended beyond the present, guiding them toward the next turn in the story. The penthouse was bathed in a soft, steady light, the chaos of the previous hours now settled into quiet clarity. Ethan Calloway stood near the console, observing the monitors one last time, each screen a testament to the challenges, choices, and revelations that had unfolded. Miles clutched Lila Harrison's hand, eyes bright with relief, sensing the end of uncertainty and the safety that now enveloped them. Lila exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing, the protective tension in her posture easing as she surveyed the room, aware that the immediate danger had passed, and the delicate web of trust and authority had been restored and strengthened. Ethan moved closer, each step deliberate, careful, aware of the weight of what had been resolved and the emotional bonds that had deepened through the ordeal. The papers on the console remained, a symbol of the secrets uncovered, yet their threat had dissipated, transformed into lessons learned and truths acknowledged. Miles smiled softly, his laughter tentative but genuine, and Ethan felt the warmth of connection, a reminder that responsibility carried the reward of trust and love. Lila's eyes met his, and in that moment, unspoken understanding bridged the space between them, blending respect, reliance, and a shared recognition of the courage required to navigate the trials they had faced together. Ethan's breath steadied, slow and measured, as he absorbed the finality of choices made and the permanence of the changes in their dynamic, the authority he wielded now tempered by empathy and collaboration. The sunlight shifted across the polished floors, highlighting reflections, shadows, and the subtle glint of small details, each one a quiet reminder of the intricacies of trust, observation, and vigilance. Every movement, every glance, every heartbeat carried meaning, and the room held the gentle hum of resolution, the emotional payoff complete yet lingering with the depth of experience. Lila guided Miles toward the sofa, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and Ethan joined them, presence and awareness blending with quiet satisfaction, the past tension transforming into calm understanding. The monitors flickered softly, reminders of lessons learned, and Ethan's gaze lingered on the small details, acknowledging the growth, the shifts, and the resilience that had carried them through. Miles leaned into Lila, laughter fading into soft murmurs, and Ethan's eyes softened, seeing the child's trust mirrored in the adult's unwavering presence, the bond now unbreakable. As the room held its gentle quiet, the lessons of vigilance, courage, and empathy echoed, a moral resonance settling. In the space between them, and Ethan felt the enduring truth, true strength is measured not by control, but by the courage to care, the wisdom to trust, and the patience to protect those who rely upon you.